So first of all, welcome to this Digital Classicist seminar. For those of you who are here for the first time, it's the second year we are running this seminar, which is supported by the German Archäologisches Institut and Pompeii mainly. And it's been set up following the Digital Classicist seminar that some colleagues have been running in London since 2007. And we are glad that this year, Gabriel Godard, who is one of the founders of the Digital Classicist as a community, is here with us for the seminar. The main idea of the Digital Classicist as a community is to have a forum for discussion between people with an interest in applications of technology to the Altertumswissenschaft. And we are trying in our seminar and also in the London seminar to be as open and as wide and as comprehensive as possible concerning the antiquity to which the technology is applied to. There is a list, an attendance list that is going to be circulated. There is a Digital Classicist Germany mailing list, and if you leave your address, if you are not subscribed already, you will be subscribed to the mailing list. And apart from that, it's important for us to know how many people are here, so please sign it. The seminar is video recorded, and the first part of the discussion will also be video recorded. So if you have anything that you want to say and you don't feel quite comfortable about saying it, you can keep it for the formal discussion, which is not going to be video recorded, which will take place with the wine and nibbles and refreshments. As you can see here, some of us, those of us that can access the internet, try to use the DigiClass hashtag that has been established already for the community to tweet a little bit about the seminar. So if you are on Twitter, you can use that. I think this time I haven't forgotten anything. So it's my pleasure to introduce Eric Poehler, who is assistant professor at the Classicist department of the University of Massachusetts Amherst, and has been working for quite a long time in Pompeii on the Archäologisches project, for instance. And this evening we'll present about the Pompeii Bibliography and mapping project. So I'll leave it to you. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Matteo, for the introduction. Thank you for inviting me. I am going to speak a little bit about a new project for me, which is a digital project. I'll introduce myself by saying that I'm coming at this from the archaeologist and classical perspective, with someone who's dabbled quite a bit in IT and technical issues, but isn't himself a coder or hacker. That's what I want to help. I want to say thank you to groups like the ACLS, the American Council of Learned Societies, the National Endowment for the Humanities Digital Start-Up grant program, and my department, my college, my university, and the Digital Humanities Institute at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, all of whom have been incredibly supportive and generous in supporting this idea and getting it sufficient resources to be realized, at least in its initial offering. So let me tell you a little bit about what that is. I can't see my presenter notes. Should be the first indication of me being an archaeologist rather than an IT person. But here is, hopefully you can see this. What I can see is a satellite image of Pompeii. And this is obviously my research interest. It's my interest for a very long time, since 1997 when I first walked on the site and decided I was going to be going back here as many times as possible. And since then, I haven't missed a summer. But it's also the origin of this project because this project came from a dissertation, or rather, not the actual dissertation, but the anxiety that comes from trying to work through a dissertation. So if you're doing a dissertation, the first thing you need to ask, obviously, is has it been done before? And if not, the next thing you need to ask is, how can I do it? Right? So these are pretty simple, straightforward questions. For me, I had made this observation that there were stones like this one that you may be able to see, with a curving bit of wear that actually you can use to determine the direction that carts were going down the street. And I had found them in one particular place in the city, and I had found them all across the city. So my how do I do it question is, how do I take this observation, record it, combine it with hundreds and actually literally a couple thousand of other observations, and then match it and share it and combine it with objects from somewhere else, right? So obviously I needed to do two things. I needed to do the research and primary and secondary sources that helped me understand the context of traffic and driving, and then I needed a good map. And I didn't just need a good map, I needed a map that I could add information into. I needed a Geographical Information System, a GIS. Let me start with the next slide, which is the great resource that we have for Pompeian studies. I had the good fortune of having all these anxieties about my dissertation, that I suppose the very normal anxieties about if someone else has already done it and I'm going to waste 4 years of my life to determine someone else had already said this in, say, 1821 in some obscure monograph that was unknown to me. But as I said, I had the good fortune of starting my dissertation in 2000 because this monumental book, Nova Biblioteca Pompeiana, produced by Laurentino Garcia, is an astounding 2-volume, 15,000 source compendium with lots and lots of information about Pompeii, nearly exhaustive. I say nearly exhaustive because this is the digital third volume, has been reproduced, and you can actually go on the website, the publisher's website right now, and you can see the third edition where they've updated some of this. My publication should be right in here somewhere, but they're not. So there are some small, minor details to be worked out with that. So there is room for improvement even in this amazing resource. So let me say, and also one other kind of parenthetical to tell you about the reason why I'm going through this, is that the products that help me work on my dissertation will eventually become the digital products that fulfill the objective of the Pompeii Bibliography and Mapping project. So as I say, 15,000 citations plus. Each one of those citations, if it has different iterations or additions, those are noted. If the author was of particular note, or even if just the birth and death dates are known, and if they're still alive, that information is included. And two very, very valuable aspects of it is that there is an index for this, a thematic index, and that there's a spatial index, an index that takes the sources and these secondary sources as they are known and applies them and says they relate to, they have information about this particular house. And Garcia gives a listing of those at the end of the second volume with the address of the Pompeian house or shop or workshop, public building, etc. But this obviously isn't everything we could also possibly want. I say it was hard to access because it was expensive and rare. They've produced with a new publisher, they produced all the volumes in PDF and released them on the web, which you can download now, which is a great help. I wish they'd done it 3 years ago when I was struggling through correcting OCR transcripts, but they've done it now, so that's fantastic. Nonetheless, even with this great electronic research, it's still hard to search. The original book is difficult to use because it's so big. It is such a massive source. So when you want to find something, the authors are listed alphabetically. All the works are listed underneath the author's heading chronologically. And so if you were to go to the index, come back, you flip through pages and pages to find this. Obviously, when you want to do multiple sources, when you want to do an important place, this produces a lot more effort, physical effort, than you might want to expend. Even today with the PDFs, what you'd have to do is take the 26 letters of the alphabet into which the individual PDFs are broken into for ease of downloading and for general use. And if you wanted to do a more generalized search within those, you need to first combine them together or ask your computer in other ways to search those texts. The indices are limited in the sense that there's only so much that one human being, as remarkable as Laurentino Garcia and his efforts have been, that one person can do. So the thematic index, if you exclude Herculaneum, and it gets it to about a 200 if you do that, there's only about 120 ideas, concepts, themes that are listed, including some people in there as well. And the other thing is that, and I just ran this statistic last night. I came with this idea just to take the full listing of the spatial index, remove all the duplicates, and then divide that against the total number of citations, and that we find that of all those possible citations, only a quarter of them are actually linked to a place. So if your thinking about Pompeii is directed not first by idea or a question, but by a place and the questions that might start from space, you have a harder time getting there than you might be able to if we filled in this other 75%. The other thing that I needed into doing my dissertation was a good map. And I needed a GIS map. I needed to digitize the Pompeian maps. And this is basically the main maps that students have to work with, and even professionals we have to work with starting through the 2000s, starting in, I don't know, when I started looking at 98. The Eschenbach plan of 1970 is still one of the great marvels of our scholarship, updated in 93. The work by Halstead van der Pol and the Corpus Topographicum Pompeianum, produced in 1986 in some unfinished volumes. The Ricca maps are another great source that we could have. The Neapolis, how should I say this consortium of individuals and ideas about what Pompeii could be in the digital age was compiled and released in 1994, and that produced what you basically have today that's called the Pompeii the superintendency's CAD plan. This is a plan that's been circulating widely now, although 10, 12 years ago, I had to write a letter to the superintendent asking specifically if I could have it and use it. So it was more tightly controlled. But there's a legacy here. So the Eschenbach plan was made through the addition of some surveying. The Corpus Topographicum and Neapolis plans are made first through digitizing aerial photography. And the World of Pompeii plan, which I know quite well because I worked on that plan, is the superintendency's plan, edited and produced with new information, including door numbers, but in image format. So these are all really excellent plans, and here you see examples. Don't have a laser pointer, but at the top you see an example of that current plan. Thank you. I was like, how did that happen? On the top you see a plan from a recent publication. This is from Stephen Ellis's The Making of Pompeii. It's a JRA supplement. It's probably the most recent book that describes the current thinking from excavation resources about Pompeii. And these are some of the maps from it. So this one actually comes directly from the World of Pompeii. You can see that Mark Robinson has edited the one area to indicate where on space we are. But in the same volume, we have the Topographicum map here. And this is the detailed plan that they're using here. And an older, even more schematic plan above to indicate the location where in the city these areas of interest that are being referred to in the detail plan come from. The absence of a central plan, the absence of a good mapping system for Pompeii has meant that despite the truly revolutionary ways that the last 30 years have come to think about that city, the new ideas and the development and the revitalization of some older ideas, those are not being reflected in our plans. They're not only not being reflected in the sense that this plan, right, through no fault of the authors, probably doesn't reflect the clarity of thinking that they want to, the newness of their ideas. But that might be cosmetic to you, right? Let me describe the need for a new plan, a new map of Pompeii in another sense, or maybe in another way. Let's say you weren't an archaeologist, but rather you were a student of fashion, okay? I'm going to use a strange analogy here. And in order to talk about fashion of today and the influence of, say, a band like U2, you had to use one of these images as your starting point to illustrate your concepts and points. Instead of saying, hey, here's a picture of Bono in 2013 and what he is wearing and how he's impacting fashion, you could say, actually, no, here's a picture of him with his fantastic mullet in 1980, and use that as the basis of supporting your arguments. Now, at one point, this is just illustrative, right? It's just saying, well, this picture doesn't fit the text, and that can be, off-putting, perhaps, in a way. But in maps, it's far more than that, because the last 30 years have done more than just gotten better hair, metaphorically speaking. They've also improved our maps. We have changed what we think the landscape of Pompeii looks like. We have done a better job of correcting what had been the state of the art. But our maps don't do that. Every time somebody wants to start with a new idea about Pompeii, they go back and grab a map that's 30 years old, that doesn't reflect the changes and ideas that are published, that are out there to be known, but if they want to incorporate them, it's up to them to incorporate them on their own. Our maps are incredibly, our scholarship is incredibly dynamic, and our maps are incredibly static. So forgive my use of Bono's mullet. So again, to begin, this process, again, it goes back to the dissertation, and in order to produce a map that was dynamic, something that I could add in my information that would eventually become, as I say, the basis for the mapping project that we're talking about today. I'll start this now, even though a bit late. I took the CAD plan of Pompeii, and over the course of maybe 3 years, and sitting in the evenings, I added, and these will be really hard to see, I added all the stepping stones that are not included in the plan. I added all of the 300 or so curbstones that I had mentioned before that that have this evidence that I need. So I needed to add those so they could contain that information. I digitized all the sidewalks and all the streets and all the alleys. I added the city gates and the fortification walls, the unexcavated areas of the city, and although they didn't really show up too well, all the individual city blocks, all the insulae of the city as well. And then it got really complex when it was time to figure out if traffic moving in the city was meaningful against where it was going. If the topographic landscape, the landscape of function, meant anything. So if that was to be compared and understood, I needed to digitize the 1,300 or so individual properties, or at least individually divided spaces in Pompeii, and then carefully add in that functional information that Eschenbach had derived and had been edited and updated. So this, quite genuinely, took me in the course of about 3 years working on it, mainly through evenings, watching sports and digitizing, as I think is probably the only way to accomplish that kind of a task. I finally had the GIS that I wanted. I finally had the opportunity to run the analyses that I want. I finally had the chance to make the maps to help me interpret what I thought was meaningful about the history of Pompeii and what statement I wanted to make about it. In 2007, I went to a conference and I saw a colleague give a paper, and he started it somewhat like I'm doing now, talking about how he went through laboriously digitizing every single one of these same things. And I realized I had spent hours of my life doing something someone else had done as well. And it wasn't so heartbreaking to me from a personal, wasn't heartbreaking to me to think I'd wasted that time. I felt like actually I learned a lot while doing the digitization. It was heartbreaking to think that those hundreds of hours I spent were spent by someone else who probably didn't necessarily want to, whose object of interest was ancillary to the process of digitization. They just needed the spatial data and they wanted to run the analysis. And so very clearly, January probably 5th or 6th, it was an AIA meeting, of 2007, I realized we have to let this data go. We have to get it out there. We have to get it online somehow. And so for the next 3 years, I began to find ways to do this. First, it was simply just standing up and waving my hand and saying, listen, I've got shape files. If you want them, I'll give them to you. And then by 2010, I had a great partner with a private company in Western Massachusetts, a man named Wim Tingle of Main Street Maps, who currently still actually hosts the map. And he put this online for the first time in February of 2010. If you go online today to Main Street Maps, and I think it's just / Pompeii, you can actually go on and see these basic files on there today. And the basic demo of the project that I'm talking about is available. So what's the history of the project and why do we need it? We need it because Pompeii has a huge bibliography for a single archaeological site. It has a huge and detailed landscape, and those two things are ripe for combination. They are independently very worthy of being a digital project, and together, I feel, and what I want to talk to you about next, is that I feel that they are best not just combined in the same space on the internet, space in a computing environment, but interlinked so that the physical environment, the physical landscape of Pompeii can be leveraged to organize and structure the information and the search of information and the querying of information about Pompeii by the GIS. So now, one of these slides, which is just the big picture of the things that we have. This project revolves around two main data sources, as I've just said, the GIS and an exhaustive bibliography. We're also working right now with Google, with HathiTrust, with Internet Archive to get as much of the extant full text information that's out there, to get those links and to provide them to our bibliography so you can go from thinking to searching to reading very, very quickly. We're also going to, as we are allowed by licensing agreements, to capture those PDFs to work on the OCR and get a full text repository so that we can also do some natural language processing under the direction of David Smith, currently at Northeastern University, who's going to help us deal with some of these issues starting in the spring semester, during the spring of 2014. And then finally, we're also going to create a user interface for this. So this is the other kind of slide that one shows, right? If we think of these things as silos of information, I shouldn't say the word silo. Think of these as data banks, maybe is a better word. What do we want to have in here and what do we want it to do? Right? We want to have the standard bibliographic search, and that may sound simplistic, but I really honestly believe that I'm firmly committed to the idea that not everybody who comes to this site and is interested in Pompeii should have to use some whiz-bang technology. If they want to come in and use the digital version of a card catalog, then I want to provide that tool to them. If that's the level of information and the search technology they want, then by all means, I simply want just basic bibliographic search tools so that they would have that opportunity. I want to have as much full text as I can, whether that's simply to be linked out or to be actually captured and kept in a repository of our own. Again, that has much more to do with licensing than any type of technical limitation, so far at least. We need to add new citations. So one of the projects we're beginning to research now are how do we get these new citations in? How do we determine what we've missed? right? Because there is information that's post-1998. When the first 2 volumes come in, there are things that even superhumans can't find, and there are constantly a stream of new sources coming in. So how do we make sure that our as close to exhaustive database doesn't slowly run itself away from being exhaustive? And then finally, we'll want to create, and probably through that same process, because I do see that the community and crowdsourcing will be an important aspect of keeping ourselves current. The interested user groups will, and stakeholders as they're called, will definitely be a source of information. Other bibliographic materials, including images and periodicals or secondary sources that are not currently included. So instead of scholarly journals, we would also think that newspaper articles and more popular periodicals would also be eventually included in this. There is our current GIS already is linked to some image information. There's a site called Pompeii in Pictures, run by Bob and Jackie Dunn, and each of our individual properties is linked to one of their pages. It's a very low-tech matching process of simply having copied and pasted all the URLs with a student into the GIS files, but it works, and it is a good proof of concept, if not proof of process. The other item is the GIS, obviously, right? So I've talked to you first about having the files and sharing them, but simply being able to go to your computer and navigate the landscape of Pompeii, to turn on those features on and off, and to look at it the way that you want to look at it, is going to be a very useful change for everyone from students, high school students, college students, professors who don't work on the topic, to researchers like myself who think about it every day. Just being able to move around quickly and elegantly within the space of Pompeii will be very useful. I have on here 4D visualization, and I make no means to gloss over the difficulty of dealing with time in maps. That is something that is there's in fact a group interested in that, who's making good progress on that, and things like Time Mapper are showing some good progress. I'll come back to visualization in a second after I talk about the last 2 items. It's important to me that the files that we have be something that you could simply download just straight away, that you can cut out a segment of the city if you don't need all of them. If you just need a particular house, you cut it out, take that with you. But it's equally important to me that if researchers are making new spatial data, if they're finding something wrong by working in the field and correcting it, making better spatial data, that we give them the opportunity, certainly not requiring anyone, but give them the opportunity to bring it back up and serve it to the public, so that the next group of people won't have this static map. We will have this dynamism, and having, therefore, a versioning archive is really necessary. A versioning archive is necessary because just as an image map or a paper map reifies and concretizes interpretation, so would accepting whatever someone sent in as the next new thing as being real. So having a menu, having a selection of interpretive choices that individuals can make about the long history of Pompeii, the specific property divisions between a house and a shop, whether or not they actually go together, and the arguments that get made on those type of things, that's all the reason for this versioning archive. And those things then go back to the visualization, because then we'll have people be able to make maps based on what other people have thought about the city. If they can start their article on Bono with as recent an image as possible. How are we going to make that connection here on the bottom is through those sources I've just spent some time detailing. Through Garcia's spatial index is the primary way that we're making this connection, and through the Corpus Topographicum Pompeianum's toponymy section. So it has a long listing of names and spaces. Unfortunately, the naming conventions and the nomenclatures are different, and they will have to be reconciled in order to actually be matched. But this provides us two things. One, it provides us a way to connect to the GIS, connect the GIS to our database of citations, and it also provides a fairly close to, a very good starting point. I shouldn't say close to exhaustive, but a very good starting point for an authority list to begin once we have a bulk of full text, a corpus of full text, to begin to use to search and index and cross-reference against this, what appears to be about, there's 200 pages or so of information that have largely been corrected by us now. So that's how we're going to overall make that connection. And then the last thing, and this is the only thing I can show you about it right now, because at this point it's still more in my head than it is in any reality, is a user interface. One that's largely bidirectional. One where if you're interested in searching the bibliography and don't care about the map, you can simply search the bibliography and that will produce the results that you want. You can go from searching to reading. And if you're interested, we'll put on the side a gazetteer that reflects what you've been shown and the places of mention within them. That's once we get that full text searching capabilities. We'll have some basic elements of it at the very beginning. Or the way that I would go at this as an archaeologist is to go to the map first, click on the place I'm interested in, and get just the list of things that we think are the primary sources, the most important sources about it. And then, if I'm interested in the house across the street because they have a physical, visual, cultural, symbolic relationship, whatever that relationship is that is not going to be in a thematic index, I can simply move my cursor, click, and get the next set of information. So that will be reduced dramatically. And so those are the two kind of ways of doing this bidirectionally. The biggest power, though, is the combination and recombination of these two kinds of tool sets. The bibliographic tool sets that are very common and understood and well understood, and the geographical search tools that are very well understood. But if you combine the bibliography and the map together, you can run queries that are, I believe, incredibly powerful and new and very efficient. So imagine, and this would not be something that a college student in Pompeii in a class about Pompeii would not necessarily, that they would probably want to do at some point. And certainly 20 years ago, this was something people were very interested in. Imagine running a multi-language search for Haus in a bibliography or a full-text archive about Pompeii, right? Even just the bibliography, you're probably going to get an unusable number of results, right? You might as well just have gone through the list rather than sorting this way. But being connected to the GIS has real value. And that is, not only can you sort that information in bibliographic ways, by author, by title, by year, those kinds of things, but you can take a subsection of that bibliographic list based on the size of the property you're interested in. So if you're interested in what are ostensibly average, middle to lower, average size houses in Pompeii, if that's the culture set or the economic group you're looking for, you can cut across that stratum by using a spatial search. You could return to the bibliographic search by saying, hey, I'm really interested in things that happened in the last 35, 40 years or something like that, or even the last 20 years, or perhaps in the earliest publications, whatever your area of interest is. And then you could return to the bibliographic information and do something like this, which is to say, I want to know if that house of average size, say published in the last 30 years, recently understood, has a direct physical relationship to a shop. Now, that isn't going to tell me if that shop is within the confines of the house, although I suppose we could, if we get our topology rules correct, we could say is contained by. But in the matter of moments, we could start answering questions that were of interest 20 years ago, which is, what houses of an average size have commercial profiles in Pompeii? Is there a connection between those things, or are they, or is this fantasy? So this, I think, is the real power of this project, is the ability to recombine spatial and bibliographic information in ways that are currently not done. I'll talk just briefly on the future. Let's see what time I've been talking here. About what we want to do. Obviously, one of the first things is, and this is why I'm here, is that there are a number of you who know much more about this. And if we take things as simple as an interest in what the landscape of the publication history of Pompeii is, we know what the excavation history is spatially, right? We can actually talk intelligently about that, looking at the process of digging things out of the ground. But what has the impact of the excavations been on the scholarship, right? We could imagine this kind of rolling sequence of houses having more kind of popularity, maybe importance, if we want to use that term. And when we look at an engram, certainly we don't want to confuse those two ideas of popularity and importance. But when we are able to look at just the corpus of Pompeian archaeology, what will that mean? What will we learn about the ways in which we've studied the city? One of the things when I started just playing around with this last month, thinking about, well, what is this, what if we start putting house names in engrams? What does that mean? I was expecting, obviously, to get that kind of bump right at the time of excavation. But what some of these profiles are showing is that there are actually periods of interest that don't relate to the time period of their excavation. So if we look at the House of Panza here in red, the House of the Surgeon in blue, both of those were excavated a century earlier, more than a century, 150 years earlier, then they're this great peak of interest, right? There isn't even anything hardly mentioned earlier for the House of Panza. So it's this period of Maiori's excavations that seem to bring these houses back to fore and bring them back into the interest. So not only can we, by looking closely at this corpus, understand access and search information about Pompeii, we'll, I think, begin to understand how certain parts of the city begin to reflect our understanding, to influence the way that we conceive of things, become the examples that we use when we make arguments. That will be very interesting, and someone out there is going to do a great paper on it. I hope it's me. And just a really simple one of these, it occurred to me, and this actually occurred to me yesterday, that there's a house that was excavated by Spinazzola in the 1920s, Insula 2 of Region 2, over here in the west, the east part of the city. And on Della Corte's attribution, it was called the House of Laureus Tiburtinus. And here in red, you can see how important that was. And since then, we've grown a bit more skeptical of some of the attributions that he's given to putting names of people as the owners of houses. And you can see that falling off rather dramatically. And a different Octavius Quartio name being given, taking over in the last 25 years. So these are kinds of trends I think will be very interesting. Some of you have thought about this a good deal more, and I hope you'll tell me what I should be thinking. I'm also very interested in thinking about changing in the first step, changing the resolution that we focus on Pompeii spatially. So before we had a good map, and when the first time we had the opportunity to really look spatially at the city, probably a book that most classicists and anyone who's ever looked at Pompeii for more than 5 minutes knows, The Houses and Societies of Pompeii and Herculaneum by Wallace Hadrill, published in 1994, made an incredible impact on Pompeian scholarship. And at the heart of that book, beyond the erudition and scholarship and thinking, at the heart of that book is the area of different places. So much of the data is about how big a place is that gives us some information, and then tying so many other things in. That's one of the simplest statistics that you can get out of a GIS, right? Today, we think of that as just being so minute, but yet we were really able, while Tadril was really able, to make a quantum leap forward, or at least a quantum leap in argumentation forward in our understanding of the site. That's from the how big is a house argument. What if we reduce the resolution down to the individual rooms? I have some students in the University of Massachusetts right now who are taking the images from Pompeii, Puture, and Mosaici, where individual houses have their rooms labeled, and they're drawing every one of the individual rooms. What will it mean for Pompeian scholarship if just the property size is meaningful? What will it mean if I can tell you the average size of every atrium? What if I can divide that statistically into size and dimensional categories? What if I can tell you the number of atria that have a tablinum on it, or ali, or how many cubiculi surround them on average? What will that mean? I don't know. But if we can make a major impact by saying houses of certain sizes have certain characteristics and certain decorations, then what about rooms? That, I think, is a big step forward. I know that one of the first steps I want to do is Miko Flor, a colleague of mine and perhaps some of yours, has recently made an argument, in a forthcoming argument, that we can use the room count, the number of rooms per property, to help us reconstruct the number of people who inhabited Pompeii. He has done this, and he's settled on a very traditional number, but through a very unique formula to get there. What would Miko say if I turned his count into area? How would that change his thinking? So these are some of the ways in which I'm really interested in adapting the work that we're doing towards the future. What will the next 6 months, 9 months of the project look like? And lastly, the other thing I'm interested in is what benefit can we be as model to places that have really rich archaeological and informational environments? So there's probably, to my opinion, the best archaeological website resource out there is Ostia Antica. It is an absolutely amazing research, and Jan Theo Bakker, who's put it together, is to be commended immensely. But the only thing I'd want to improve is all this great information within the website. It's the image mapping, right? The mapping of the image itself, that you click on it and it takes you to an HTML page. This is something that we can improve. And this project that I'm working on now, the Pompeii Bibliography and Mapping project, our documentation of our process hopefully will be of benefit and value to people when they start working on a new archaeological research site, or return to another one that is well understood, has a rich bibliography, and begin to say, what if we did for our site what they did at Pompeii? And hopefully we'll have a nice little book of do's, and probably if half the book will be do's, and well, the larger half will be don'ts, probably. But we hope that will be another major piece of value of this research for the future. And with that, I'll take questions. Thanks.